And then re-encountering that bear about a week later, us going back to that same area. We would always fly around and do bear scans, and then actually seeing that little bear hanging around, because the reason that he was probably there was a much, much bigger bear who had killed a walrus and was, having his meal over like several week period on the beach. So yeah, I mean, also just getting to see these interactions of wildlife, which I've been very privileged to be able to do. I've so many of those stories, but yeah, just to have that really deep connection to the land, because I feel like you get to see a bit more of that in these places that are less inhabited by humans as well.
Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of the Sacred Travel Podcast. And today I have Erin with me. First and foremost, Erin Bros is a Canadian astrologer. She is also a field geologist and recently retired after 13 seasons of tree planting. She stumbled upon astrology on the steps of her Saturn return in 2018. As she gained insight and learned more, she realized how powerful of a tool astrology is. Not only did it allow her to become more self-aware and self-assured in who she is, but also gave context to the world around her. She has stayed in a much more empowered place since 2020 because of astrology. Her missions are to bring you the gift of astrology and help guide you back to yourself and to understand the deeper meanings of this one precious life that we have. Welcome, Erin. I am so excited to have you here.
Hey, Julia. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And today we are going to be speaking about the medicine of the Tundra. So I am excited to hear what is your very personal connection to the Tundra.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of just happened in, the bio sort of emphasizing my work as an astrologer. I feel like that component actually enhanced, my other career as a geologist, which is obviously how I began to start spending time on the tundra about 11 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, it just came to me through work, obviously. And, I've had the privilege now of spending many summers up on the tundra. I'm actually going to be in a few days' time flying up to the tundra again as well. It'll still very much be winter up there. So yeah, I started out just with some field seasons with geology work, but I was able through that work to cover very large areas of ground and really, yeah, just get really connected to this area of Canada specifically, and also of the Arctic and of the Inuit peoples. As their culture and their traditional ways of life, and just what I've learned from being on their land and, working with them and getting to know them has obviously also allowed me to connect deeper to the tundra in a lot of ways. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe because obviously I grew up in a treed area below tree line, in more southern Canada. But I feel, a little bit through all the years I've been up there, but then astrologically, I'm sure there's connections to why I am there, which I've even learned a little bit of since spending some time in Egypt and closer to the desert and seeing the similarities there. So I'm sure there's some other connections there that are much deeper, but it's just a place where I feel very at peace. And there's, for anyone who hasn't experienced being on the tundra, because it has a similar feel to the desert, but it's very interesting when there's no sort of reference points for anything. So your whole concept of time and space completely changes. But there's something really calming about that. It's almost a similar feeling of looking up in the night sky where, you see stars and planets and things so far away. And it really kind of humbles you and reminds you how small and insignificant you are in some ways. And I think the tundra can kind of do that as well, but in a very physical sense, like here on Earth, because you're so small relative to that landscape. And there's not much else out there because if you're lucky, you're not seeing any polar bears, obviously. And then depending on the area of the tundra you're in, there's often not a lot of caribou and there's not a lot of anything else. So it's kind of just like you out there with the landscape.
It sounds terrifying and it sounds beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody for sure, working in those kinds of places and in those kinds of conditions. But yeah, there is actually a peacefulness to it when you are used to it.
It's beautiful. And I love how you say that the concept of time and space gets completely like out of the perspective that we usually know. So would you say that this is one of the major I love to speak about sacred site medicine. So I want to ask, what is the sacred site medicine of the tundra? What would you say?
Yeah, well, I would say first off, because I am not Inuit by descent. And so I don't want to speak too much to what they have, but I'm sure that they have sacred sites themselves. And obviously I've witnessed some areas, mostly in and around settlements, but where you see things like Inukshuks and old site, camps that they would have and things like that that are of significance to them. But for me personally, in my experience on the landscape, I definitely, I don't know, it kind of depends. I mean, there's certain areas of the tundra that are very flat and expansive, and those have a uniqueness to them as well. I definitely gravitate towards places with more topography. So I would say some of the safer places for me have definitely been in and around the coastlines, being along the Arctic Ocean, but then also in the fjords. Because, yeah,
Oh,
there's
wow.
something about them that are very beautiful. And yeah, they look quite similar to, fjords as well that we see like in northern Scandinavia. But people don't really think about the fact that we have these fjords as well in Canada. And yeah, similar to Greenland as well. It's just a really stunning landscape. So for me, there's always been something about the way I live my life and wanting to be in places that kind of take my breath away and just remind you of the sacredness of life and like this lived experience. And I think as the Sagittarius energy that I possess is always kind of looking for these places where you can feel that connection to source, to kind of seek out these deeper meanings for life. And so, yeah, for me, some of those places really feel like that and allow me to get into that experience. And if anything, just like provide perspective and awe at, whether for brief moments or longer periods of time.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Well, I can definitely relate to that. And I feel what you just said about coming back to the source and also connecting ourselves like in the greater picture of the web of life and source like really brings us back also into our own center line and our own purpose. So I would love for you to share maybe one significant experience that you had that was on a bigger or smaller level, like life changing. Is there anything that you want or can share with our audience?
Okay. I mean, there's been a lot, and it kind of varies with like the type of experience. I can think of a couple that come to mind and they're all like a little bit different in their own way. So I'll mention those ones. The first one I can think about is last summer. So this was in an area kind of the subarctic. And yeah, I was just processing a lot emotionally at the time. And I mean, this is the benefit of the work I do as a geologist as well, where I get to be out there alone, which, yeah, for some is terrifying, but is also comforting for me in a lot of ways. And yeah, I was hiking along and, there's not many spaces where you're able to do this, where, yeah, I was just able to kind of like talk out loud and yell and scream and kind of get out what I needed to get out rather than like keeping it internal. And I feel like in some way the land will be listening to you as well and will help like absorb some of
Hmm.
that you're putting out and trying to kind of eject from your sphere and get rid of. So that's definitely one that comes to mind more recently, or just like how many times I've just been able to sit down and just cry really hard or process whatever I need to process. And it's just a very peaceful place to be able to do that. Because, it's very quiet. And if anything, the only thing you really get on the tundra, weather-wise, a lot of is wind. And so there's something beautiful about that as well, even that idea of like winds of change, because if anything, the wind will help drown out maybe your sounds or even help travel them, also like energetically kind of moving all those things away. So that's one of them. I would say another one, kind of more of like a human experience in a way, but this one comes to mind where this was back in 2018, so about 6 years ago. And I was working with another person and we had finished our hike for the day quite early. And we had come upon this like little knob of a hill, which we wanted to stay on top of because we were getting kind of close to the ocean. So we wanted to have a good vista to watch for any potential polar bears because we still had a couple hours that we had to wait before our helicopter was coming to pick us up. And I mean, it was July, August, but it never gets that warm up there. This was in not quite the high Arctic, but quite far north. And so we're trying to keep warm. And so we decided to have a 2-hour dance party on
Yay!
top of the mountain. So I just like had this playlist on my phone and I just like, yeah, put my volume super high and we just like danced for almost like 2 hours
Oh,
straight.
I love that.
Yeah, it was just so much fun. Yeah, like I always remember that moment and just, yeah, being out there with that energy and just like laughing and just being so playful and just being surrounded at the same time by this beautiful landscape. That was really incredible. Uh, and then the last one I would say, because they're all very kind of all different emotions too. The last one would be in 2019, the year after that. I was working along the coast, and this was late August. And I was working with another geologist who was assisting me. It was his first season on the tundra. And I was very lucky in the whole situation, but we did encounter a polar bear on the ground about a kilometer away from us, which is basically everyone's worst nightmare. So that experience was very intense. And I was actually having a lot of dreams that month about polar bears. And when they come into the dreams for me, they tend to signify like really big change. And I knew astrologically at the time that I was going through some really big shifts. I was in my Saturn return at the time and I had that awareness. So coupled with my experiences on the tundra, it was like kind of being reflected in a couple different realms for me because I actually after that took a year away from geology and sort of tried to leave the industry completely. But yeah, in that moment, yeah, we got very lucky with the helicopter being nearby and not being like an hour away because then it could have been a very, very different situation. But yeah, just kind of defaulting to my training and my like quick response on everything. But yeah, just the experience of having to like point a loaded gun at a polar bear and having someone with me who maybe for a good reason didn't really understand the full gravity of the situation. And then having to kind of round up the rest of my team after that and leave the area. That was really, really intense and terrifying.
Wow.
um,
Yeah.
and yeah, since then, I've had much more awareness and kind of not quite paranoia in a way, but just it really changed the way that I'm on the tundra, I would say. So that was kind of like a pivotal shifting moment for me in terms of how I worked on the tundra before then and how I work on the tundra after then. Yeah. And then re-encountering that bear about a week later, us going back to that same area. We would always fly around and do bear scans and then actually seeing that little bear hanging around because the reason that he was probably there was a much, much bigger bear who had killed a walrus and was, having his meal over like several week period on the beach. So yeah, I mean, also just getting to see these interactions of wildlife, which I've been very privileged to be able to do. I've so many of those stories, but yeah, just to have that really deep connection to the land because I feel like you get to see a bit more of that in these places that are less inhabited by humans as well. So yeah, that experience as well, kind of those different spectrums of emotions of things that I've experienced on the tundra. Those are like the three main ones that come to mind.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for, yeah, really speaking that variety. And what comes to me while listening to you, it really feels that, because of there is basically no outward distraction, it feels that everything that is happening has its own significance in a way, and that things feel a lot more amplified as they are happening because overall there is less distraction that we can focus on, and so it gets really focalized into these experiences that you just spoke to. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, I've got my phone to play music and things, which I'll often do. Not always, but a lot of the time, when you're out there every single day for, many weeks or months at a time. But yeah, but you don't obviously there's no roads, there's no civilization, there's no towns around, there's no cell service. So, I mean, other than being focused obviously on your job, yeah, you're fully present in those surroundings, which is, tends to be more of a rarity nowadays with just technology and everything we have access to. So, yeah, and I would say in general, all the experiences you have there in part, I think because of the energy of polar bears, because I have been able to be up close to them as well in a safe manner, but being able to be right up close to one and being able to actually like touch one and feel its energy. There's something so deep and powerful there. I can't even really like explain it, but I think they bring a lot of that to the tundra and to that landscape as well. But yeah, there is something like I think it's very like root sacral chakra about this area that's yeah, it just really like draws you in and connects you in and kind of the way that the ocean does as well. I feel like it really like demands respect.
Hey, everybody. If you are enjoying the show, then you would do me the biggest favor in clicking the subscribe button and engaging with my content so I can continue to deliver these beautiful conversations to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah. So you were mentioning it in the beginning, and I also know that when the two of us were in Egypt together, you spoke about the similarities that you feel between the tundra and the desert. So I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about that. Like, what have you come to see, to feel, to experience, how these perceivably different landscapes and also landscapes that are quote unquote on the first glimpse like not so life prone. How did you experience that?
Yeah, well, I noticed it the first time when we were down in southern Egypt, just even with the topography that I saw. So yeah, an area that we were with this big lake and the other side of the lake, it was quite mountainous and looked actually slightly fjord-like in ways. And just the landscape itself, I think, without having trees on it, which is obviously the similarities between the desert and the tundra. Yeah, I don't know there. And I think there was something subconscious that just reminded me so much of the tundra as well, maybe even energetically. But yeah, just the way that, the bedrock especially was exposed in certain ways. Yeah, I don't know. I just really connected to that. And then the similarities of the desolation of the environment and obviously the extreme temperatures, like they have a lot of similarities just physically as well. And I feel like, I've spent not a ton of time in the desert. I have also spent a bit of time in the desert over in North America as well in the Mojave Desert. And I feel like, nature has so many good reminders. But what I've seen from my time on the tundra and then even seeing it slightly from my shorter amounts of time in the desert is, yeah, this life where, maybe there shouldn't be life or life where it's seemingly more difficult to have life, but it's still there, and there's still so much abundance there that maybe we just don't see on first glance. So yeah, I found a lot of similarities between the desert and the tundra in those regards. But yeah, there's almost something for me that is at a much deeper level that I maybe can't even fully name at this point, of like a familiarity, and obviously a reason that I've been drawn to these lands, maybe even having past lives. I think there's definitely connections to Egypt in that area. And then maybe that's why I've ended up in this life spending so much time on the tundra in like a similar landscape. But then maybe even going back, I don't have awareness of any lifetimes in these northern regions that I spend time in Canada, but I do have a past life in northern Norway. So maybe there's, like some kind of connection there as well for me, of just my soul being drawn back to certain areas for certain reasons. So, and possibly even similarities to like other planets as well. Because I mean, like here and now, we say we don't know a lot about those things, but obviously you can like dive into the realms and see what's there, more subconsciously or like in other realities. So.
Yeah, 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 that makes a lot of sense. And I definitely also feel that, whenever we receive a call from a land, because there is also that reciprocity of, yes, we we have kind of like a nudge to go somewhere, but at the same time, it's also the land calling us or calling us back to retrieve some codes and keys.
Well, and what's interesting is, I'd already had the idea in my head that last year I wanted to go to Egypt. It was kind of in the back of my head, but then the opportunity presented itself and it all came together when I was actually on the tundra. So,
Oh, wow. So there's definitely a thread. Yeah. Yeah. So, what would you say to people who would like to experience the landscape and obviously are not so privileged like you to experience it for work? Is there any advice that you can give in terms of visiting or planning a visit?
yeah, well, I definitely tell a lot of people, even here in Canada, that if you can make the opportunity or have the opportunity to go up to the tundra and to these northern areas of Canada, to do so, because it kind of feels like you're on another planet. Maybe that's part of the point. Maybe that's part of the energy there too. Like when you were speaking earlier, I kind of thought about this weird juxtaposition of the grounding energy of the tundra, but also this feeling that it's, yeah, like ethereal, and that you're kind of like in some other world. So there's this interesting parallel between, I think, that experience that you are kind of having at the same time in this landscape. So, I mean, there are ways to go there other than work. And yeah, there is tourism up there, through mostly like cruises, because that's the easiest way to get up there is by water when the sea ice is melted, kind of in the late summer, early fall months. So, similar to ways that you can go to the subpolar regions like Antarctica as well. There are tour companies that go there, and it is mostly by boat. And then, yeah, there's lots of like little expeditions, whether it's like kayaking or doing stuff on the land. Because even in kind of the spring seasons, their spring is still very much like snow covered for a lot of it, but there's little trips you can do via snowmobile and things like that, which, for anyone overseas in Europe, of course, you can also access the tundra in northern Scandinavia as well, which, may be more accessible in some ways. And I mean, that tundra, I think there's more roads up there. I can't speak like too much to it, but obviously a little bit more accessible just to get up and see that landscape. And then, of course, the sister and where many Inuit reside as well is over in Greenland. And so that is a place that is also feasible to get to and has tourism as well as like one of their main industries. So I would say those are like the most accessible places, because obviously Siberia and Kamchatka are, a little bit more challenging to get to, probably especially right now. But yeah, that's what I know of anyways, is mostly the cruise ships at the moment. And I have heard of people coming up on sailing trips as well, independently. There's people that will come up with their sailboats as well, all the way as far as the north end of Baffin Island, which is about 73 degrees north.
Mm, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I bet that will be helpful for others who would love to explore the landscape as well. I would have another question because like while we spoke, I had this visual of the Northern Lights coming up, and I'm just curious, what is your experience with it, and maybe the energy that you feel when you are in the presence of these lights, and how they transcend us into different realms or different worlds.
Yeah, I love the Northern Lights. The aurora is one of my favorite things in the world, I would say. I was privileged to grow up with them as a kid. And relative to the actual geography of Canada, I didn't even grow up that far north. But relative to where the population actually resides in Canada, I did. And so I grew up seeing them all the time. So I'm like super spoiled, but it has definitely not destroyed the charm for me. It's still something that I love to be able to see, and have had the opportunity, even in other areas of Canada, to be able to witness as well. The really interesting thing about the tundra and the time I've spent there is, a lot of the areas where I've been on Baffin Island above the Arctic Circle, and my main work season was obviously in the summer months. So I actually get, the 24-hour daylight. So that's a whole experience in itself, which is, very, very different for kind of the human body. I haven't gotten to experience the total darkness because I haven't been up there in the dead of winter yet. Because I would like to at some point just to see what that is like. Where I live here in the Yukon, there is a point in December where we don't get very much light at all. But yeah, what's really interesting is most areas where you are on the tundra over on that northeastern side of Canada, you start to actually see the northern lights to the south just because of where the aurora pattern and those geomagnetic lines actually go around the northern hemisphere, especially. And so, yeah, there's actually a sweet spot for where the aurora will show up in the northern hemisphere. And I've worked in places that are above that. So there's actually, a lot of communities as you're getting 70 degrees and further north than that, where in this area of Canada might be a little bit different over in Scandinavia and those areas, but for this area of Canada and the way that the aurora is shaped and sort of positions on Earth, a lot of these areas won't even get northern lights because they're too far north. uh, and then, yeah, the areas that do that southern end of Baffin Island, a lot of the time you actually see them to the south. So you actually have to look south for the northern lights, which is kind of funny. But yeah, they're so easy to see and they're beautiful. Like last fall, it was only September, but the days get shorter quite a bit more quickly. And it's easy to see them at like 9 p.m. And I don't know, there is something like totally otherworldly about them. And yeah, like those moments I was talking about of just pure awe, where you're just so present in like what is happening and what you're looking at. I feel like the aurora does that as well. And I love the colors. I haven't had the opportunity to see great red colors. I mean, a few times in my life, but not recently. But yeah, lots of like greens and blues, and I've seen white a fair bit as well. So I mean, I feel like there's probably energies as well in like the colors of the lights and everything. So yeah, they're just really, really magical. It's hard to like put them into words, and I wish for every human to be able to like have that experience. Anytime I'm at work, like last fall, for example, we had a bunch of geologists on my team who had never seen them before. So it was like, if anybody saw that they were out, it was like in the group chat right away, like go outside, go check out the lights, and really cool for people to be able to see that for the first time. And just on that note quickly as well, one of the other joys I have is also bringing people to the Tundra for the first time. And, a moment last year where we were taking a small bush plane into the camp that we were going to be staying at. And I got to kind of witness my whole team, like 15 other young geologists who had never been on the tundra before. And I got to watch them all get like their first look at the tundra from the air, which is the best way to see it. So that was like really, really special. So also getting to witness those moments is really cool.
Mm, awesome. Wow. Before we complete, now we covered the lights and like the celestial in a way. I also want to go back down into the earth because of your work as a geologist. So, is there anything that you want to share? Any major insights also on the quality of the earth, of the mineral kingdom that is different or enlightening or can bring any remembrance or activation within you and within us?
Yeah, well, I feel like personally, just as a geologist, the rocks are really incredible. On the tundra, particularly like the further north you go. Well, I would say there's a bit of a sweet spot where just kind of from 60 degrees to like 75 degrees, I would say the type of rocks in these areas of northeastern Canada are really complex, really old, really interesting. There's an area on the western side of Quebec on the tundra that actually holds, controversially, I will say, it holds the oldest rocks in the world. They're a different type of rock than some of the other rocks around the globe that are very old because as of right now, the oldest rocks in the world are actually located in the Northwest Territories, which is close to and right around where the Tundra begins as well. And then other than that, there's some very old rocks located in Australia. But what's really unique about these other rocks is they are from what we know as the Hadean era or bordering on the Hadean area, which is exactly the time when Earth was still just all liquid and all magma. And it was like the
Oh,
time of
wow.
fire, which is why it's the Hadean area. It's like the time of Hades in our Earth's history before we actually had solid rock. So the fact that this area, particularly of the world and of the tundra, holds that type of rock to me is really, really special. I actually have a chunk of that rock, which is like my most prized rock in my rock collection. But yeah, even with, because I've started more and more over the years working with crystals a little bit more because obviously my background scientifically, it's like, okay, they're minerals and they're rocks and they're all these things, but of course they have metaphysical properties. And some of the most beautiful rocks that I've collected and have in my rock collection and have with me are from these areas because you can just find really beautiful examples of these minerals. I know a lot of people thinking about heart chakra, like toward the rose quartz, for example. And I've been able to just like be on traverse one day, hiking along, and then I see this big boulder or this big area where there is a big quartz vein and it's
Wow.
rose. And so I've been able, something that's really special for me is being able, I mean, there's a few crystals that I'll buy, but for the most part, I really like to be able to get them myself from where I'm working.
What a privilege.
Yeah, that was an opportunity where I got to like just take a bunch of big chunks of rose quartz and then like I have those. And so I've gotten to do that quite a bit, not always with just minerals, like which we would call crystals in like the more spiritual world. But then a lot of them I have as really nice rocks that have some of these like crystals with them. But just, a lot of the rocks in this area of the tundra are from a huge mountain belt, like billions of years ago. So if we look to the Himalaya nowadays, there was a similar mountain range several billion years ago. And these rocks were what were at the very base of the mountains. So, and now they are exposed because that huge mountain range that was like as high as the Himalayas has been eroded over billions of years. And so now it's just this much more flat landscape. And we have the exposure of these rocks that, if we could like go down to the very base of the Himalayan rocks, they would look similar in a way. So yeah, just really unique, beautiful types of rocks and minerals and gemstones, of course, as well. So yeah, so there's just so much variety. And for myself as a geologist, really interesting rocks, really complex rocks. And then because of that history, I feel like energetically they hold a lot as well.
I can just imagine. Yeah. Wow. Wow. It feels you've opened up an entire new world for us, and there's so much more to discover. But we are almost at the end. So thank you for giving us that, yeah, glimpse what is available when we connect with these landscapes and these pieces of land. Yeah. So before we close, is there anything else that you would want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say as well, because I've obviously talked about my own personal experience on these lands. I would also encourage people, because a huge part of me being in these areas and getting to experience them is also like learning about Inuit culture and history. And, there were actually peoples before the Inuit that were in these areas as well, although it's not very well documented or preserved. But the Inuit, of course, have been in these areas for thousands of years and, have been able to live on and withstand an area that is so desolate and has such harsh conditions, which is, mind blowing. We talk about all these parts of the land that are mind blowing in themselves, but then the people that exist on them are equally mind blowing and they're so deeply connected intrinsically to this land. So I would encourage listeners as well to learn more about the Inuit and the Inuit culture, because it's really fascinating. I've, purchased a couple books that are solely like stories from elders, like pre-colonization especially. And yeah, it's just fascinating, their resourcefulness and kind of what we were saying before about the desolate nature of this land versus even like the desert, and just the creativity of humans of working like with these lands is really, really interesting as well. So that would be another thing that, we didn't talk about too much because obviously I'm not in
Mm-hmm.
it, but is super, super interesting to look into and to research as well, to even help understand a little bit more these lands and, the people that have been on them for thousands of years. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up as well. Is there any resources that you would recommend in
Um,
particular?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple books, and I think there's even been some decent documentaries that have come out recently and previously as well that I know of. So I can probably share those with you so they can be in the show notes. And yeah, if you're gonna do any posts or add any photos, I can also send you some photos I have from some of these areas. It's pretty mind blowing. You don't have to be a good photographer to get like an incredible photo.
Awesome. Please do. Yes. And we'll share that. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Wow. I feel very calm. I feel very grounded now. So the energy has definitely, yeah, taken over. I mean, and I also love that I chose the desert background today and we're speaking about the tundra. So
I know. I did put like a photo of the Tundra as my background, but oh well.
Ah, wow. Thank you so much. That was really incredible. And yeah, I just love that, through you, it almost feels like a transmission and you being the voice of the land. So thank you so much for sharing all of that wisdom and knowledge with the audience.
Well, you're very welcome. And thanks so much, Julia, for having me on and yeah, having the opportunity to talk about it and even reflect on it myself a little bit, especially with heading up there in a couple days. So I feel like it'll be kind of extra special for me now to think about these people.
Yeah, beautiful. We're keeping on weaving. That's awesome. And so we are also going to be putting your links where people can find you. And I mean, we haven't really gotten into the astrology part, but if there is anybody out there who is looking for an awesome astrology reading, then definitely contact Erin. And she also has some, it's kind of like a package, right? Where you like do forecasts on is it weekly or monthly base?
Yeah, so I have another service that I offer. It's a monthly outlook service. So it's where I go over the month's transits for you every month, send it in a little recording. It's about 15 minutes long just to help people work with the energies every month in a more cost effective, but still very personalized way for someone's chart. So all those details can be found on my website. And then, yeah, on my Instagram page, it's basically a blend of my astrology and geology careers where I'll be posting about astrology matters, but then I'm also writing, kind of little personal pieces and often sharing photos of the places that, I get to be, which a lot of them are the tundra, of course. And I've been trying to kind of share more of those photos from the vault because I feel like there's so many beautiful ones that I'd like to kind of share with people and have a little bit more of an insight into where I spend my time.
Perfect. So we'll put everything there. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for sharing that sacred medicine with us. And yeah, see everybody in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.